Hello and welcome to Pre-Algebra with Miss Betsy. Today we are working with percentages and fractions. We're going to see that we can use a proportion to come up with a way to describe a fraction as a percentage. For my text, I'm using Pre-Algebra for Christian Schools. It's published by Bob Jones University Press. I'm using the first edition, and I am in Chapter 9, Section 6 on page 295. As always, you do not need to use the same text that I'm using. This will be helpful regardless of what text you're using in your class. Now, before I get started, I've got a lame joke for you, and I covered it up, so I need to find it. Why did the Oreo go to the dentist? He went to the dentist because he lost his filling. Alternatively, why did the cookie go to the doctor? Well, because he was feeling a little bit crummy. So, those are two for the price of one today on your lame jokes. We're talking about percent, and if we have the ratio of a given number to 100, that's what we call percent. So the ratio of any number, for example, 6 to 100, and that's a way of describing what we call percent, and it comes from the Latin word percentum, meaning per 100. So this is 6 per 100, which is the same as 6%. And we use this little symbol here to represent 6%. You guys are all familiar with the idea of percent. Let's say that you have a long test that you've taken in class, and the teacher just very intentionally gave you 100 questions on this test. It wasn't a hard one. Maybe it's a true-false test or a multiple-choice test, even though as you get older you'll find out that sometimes those are the worst tests in the world you come up with. But let's say that you had 100 questions on your test. You missed 7 of those, so you had 93 questions correct out of 100. I'm sure that all of you know that 93 correct out of 100 translates into 93%. And the reason, again, that it's 93% is you have the ratio here, which probably many of you never have considered this being a ratio. It's but a ratio of 93 per 100, 93 out of 100, 93%. So this is where we get the idea of percent, and we can take that percentage and go back and write it as a fraction that you would want to reduce to lowest terms. Let's say that you have 75%, written just like this. 75%, and they're going to ask you a couple of things. You can write this 75% as a fraction over 100 by simply understanding that percent means 75 per 100. So you would write this as a fraction over 100 by simply saying 75 over 100. Now if this were anything other than an expression of percent, you know I would never allow you to keep it in this form. Why is that? Because this fraction is not reduced to lowest terms. So you can take a percentage, 75%, express it as a ratio over 100, and then reduce that fraction to lowest terms. How would you reduce this to lowest terms? A number of ways, but what they're keying in on you doing right now is if you divide the numerator by 25 and the denominator by 25, you have expressed the percentage, 75%, as a ratio in lowest terms. 75% is the same as 3/4, a relationship of 3 to 4. Okay? Another way that you probably have considered that you can write 75 over 100 as a fraction in lowest terms, you might say, let me get a different color marker here. Might say, okay, 75 I can prime factor that as 3 times 25 and 5 times 5. And I can factor 100, prime factor it, 4 times 25, 2 times 2, and 5 times 5. And then you can write 75 in prime factored form in the numerator, 3 times 5 times 5, 100 in prime factored form in the denominator. And then you see that you have common factors that you can cancel. You have a pair of 5s and a second pair of 5s, leaving you with 3/4 as your reduced form, this fraction right here of 75 over 100, reduced to lowest terms. That's another way that you can reduce this fraction to lowest terms. What's something else that you can do? Is you can look at this and say, oh, I know I can take 5 out of it, and that gives me 1/15 over 25, and then divide 5 out of it again. At this point, you should all be very comfortable reducing fractions. The main point of this example is if you're given a fraction and they want this reduced to lowest terms, 75%, that percent always means that you can write it as a fraction over 100. This number written over 100 is what the 75% means. Then you can look at that and say, oh, that's a fraction, it's not reduced to lowest terms. I know what to do to this 75 over 100 to make it a reduced to lowest terms fraction of 3/4. Okay, so let's see what we want to do next. Sometimes you're going to have a ratio, or a fraction if you will, that does not have a denominator of 100. And it's going to be an easy thing to deal with. You have this fraction 3 over 20. And what the instructions tell you to do is they say express 3 over 20 as a percent by writing an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. This is actually example 2 on page 296. And this is a perfect example of how you can have a problem that you perfectly well know how to deal with, but the vocabulary or the way that it's phrased in English makes you go, what in the world is it saying? Here's your problem. And it says, express (3/20) as a percentage, and then they tell you how they want you to do it, by writing an equivalent fraction over 100. We know that we have to turn this into a percent. Okay? We know that percent can be written, a way to write percent is as long as the denominator is 100, whatever the numerator is, that represents how many percent. So they want you to write this as a percent by naming an equivalent fraction for this with a denominator of 100. All they're saying is, yeah, we know that if you have 100 in your denominator, that it can be directly named as percent, if you understand what I'm saying. How are we going to, what do we have to do to 3/20 to change the denominator to 100? What did we do to 20? 20 multiplied by 5 gives us 100, doesn't it? So if we say we had to multiply by 5 in the denominator to end up with 100, you multiply by 5 in the numerator as well. Now you have 3 times 5 is 15, 20 times 5 is 100. So the first thing that you have done is exactly what they said to do in the instructions. They said by renaming 3 over 20 as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. So you've done this. You now have 15 over 100. Are you finished with the problem? No. Let's see what the problem tells you to do. It says, express 3/20 as a percent. This is not a percent. It's a way of describing a percent, but this is not a percent. This is a fraction over 100, or it's a ratio. But what you know is if the denominator is 100, and I'm going to put a big star here. If the denominator is 100, I've never spelled is with two S's, is 100, then the numerator represents the percentage. And I'll show you what I mean, but sometimes it helps just to have a sentence written out. Represents the percentage. So what do we have now? We have this ratio, 15 over 100. Is the denominator 100? Yes. Then the numerator represents the percentage. So the numerator is the percentage, 15%. What did our problem ask us to do? It said, express 3/20 as a percentage. How? By renaming this fraction as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. So you had to say, okay, if I multiply both the numerator and the denominator by 5, then I have an equivalent fraction that is 15 over 100. Because it's 100, then I can do the final step and say that that's equal to 15%. Because when you have a ratio over 100, or a fraction with a denominator of 100, you can just write the numerator, 15, and add the percent sign. Okay? Let's go ahead and look at example 3 now and see what we have here. Our problem says, write 5/8 as a percent. Okay. We're going to have to do 5/8 as a percent. How did we do it last time? First we renamed this as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. Well, is that what it's telling us to do here? No. It says, express 5/8 as a percent by writing a proportion and solving for the unknown. Why did they not just say, rename this as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100? What do you have to multiply 8 by to get 100? There's no convenient number there. 100 divided by 8 does not divide evenly. So you can't simply rename 5/8 as an equivalent fraction over 100 because there's no whole number multiplier that will allow you to do that. So, what are they saying? How are they telling us to do it? Write a proportion and solve for the unknown. Okay, well, what do we have first? We have 5 over 8. Okay? We know that if we have 100 in the denominator, that's percent. So we can say 5 is to 8 as how many percent, as what number is to 100? X is going to be the percentage. So we could just think, let X represent the percentage. I skipped all of those words. Let X equal the percentage. The key thing to understand right here, to recognize, is that you have to set up a proportion. Remember that a proportion is a mathematical sentence saying that two separate ratios are equivalent. the ratio of 5 to 8 is equivalent to the ratio of some unknown number over 100, because when you have the denominator of 100, we're talking about percent. Then we have the fact that we can cross multiply, and we say 8 times x is equal to 5 times 100, or 8x is equal to 500. To solve this, we're going to have to divide both sides of this equation by 8. Divide by 8. We have 500 divided by 8. 6 8s are 48. 20. 2 8s are 16. And we have 40, where we annex to 0. 8 goes into 45 times. So what do we have? What value do we have for x? X is equal to 62.5. 62.5 what? It's 62.5% is what we have solved for. Now let's look at what this actually is over the denominator. This says that x is 62.5 over 100. And I just wrote on my wall, I think. 62.5 over 100. We know that when we have a ratio or fraction written over 100, that the numerator is the percentage. So we have that the fraction, 5/8, is another way of representing 62.5%. We calculated that by setting up a proportion. Okay, let me show you one more animal that looks a little bit weird at first, but when you understand what percentage is, it makes sense. It's just strange looking. I want to go ahead in your text and flip over to page 298, and they have an example. And it says, write 2.5% as a fraction in lowest terms. 2.5% as a fraction in lowest terms. How are we going to deal with this? Well, what does 2.5% actually mean? Well, it means 2.5 over 100, because percent means per 100, right? Now, is this a proper way to write a fraction? Not really. But what does this actually mean here? Let's think about what our division bar means, our fraction bar means. This means 2.5 divided by 100, doesn't it? Starting to maybe get your brain thinking a little bit here. That's not a fraction, it's a mixed number, but we can convert this into an improper fraction, can't we? 2.5 is the same as 5/2 divided by 100. Remember, you convert a mixed number to an improper fraction. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5, all over this denominator of 2. Now we have a fraction divided by a whole number. What's another way to divide with fractions? Multiply by the reciprocal. Very important. Reciprocal. Multiply by. What is the reciprocal of 100? It is 1 over 100, isn't it? Okay. We're multiplying fractions. We have common factors that we can cancel. We have a factor of 5 in the numerator, factor of 5 in the denominator, 5 times 20. No common factors remain because we simply have 1's in the numerator. So we rewrite this now as a single fraction. 2 times 20 is 40. What did our problem ask us to do? It said, write 2.5% as a fraction in lowest terms. We had 5 halves times 1 over 100. If we multiplied it out, it would have been 5 over 200. We chose to reduce by canceling common factors before we multiply. So, 2.5% is the same as 1/40th, because it says write as a fraction in lowest terms. 2.5% is 1/40th of a dollar. 2.5 cents would be 1/40th of a dollar if we still had such things as half cents. So what you're going to be working with today, look on those problems, do your homework. If you get stuck, shoot me a text, and I'll be happy to help you.